Namaskara, good evening, and welcome to BIC Streams. Bangalore International Center, or BIC for short, is an inclusive and neutral platform for informed conversation, intellectual dialogue, exchange of ideas, and the arts. Today's session is Transformation through Partnership, Community Engagement with a Deep Reach. The session tonight will highlight the critical contributions of social responsibility programs that have engaged with community over an extended period of time. The panelists include Meena Raghunathan, who has been in the nonprofit sector for over 35 years at the GMR Varalakshmi Foundation. She headed the CSR function for the GMR Group with activities in over 20 locations in the country. The foundation has a mandate to develop social infrastructure and enhance the quality of life of communities around the location where the group has a presence. She is in the process of writing a book titled Doing Good, Navigating the CSR Maze in India, due to be out later this year. Snigdha Parupudi, whose book A Silent Revolution on the Srinivasan Services Trust, the social arm of the TVS Motor and Sundaram Clayton, brings this engagement to the fore. As the blurb says, what started out as the charity wing of a well-known business group quickly transformed into something quite different, evolving into a model of community development that is self-sustaining and empowering. Our third panelist is Sanjeev Narayan, great-grandson of the founder and secretary of the Trust of the RBNMS Educational Charities. RBNMS's work in education began about 150 years ago when the founder, Sri Narayan Swami Mudaliar, started schools and educational institutions for boys, girls, and students from Dalit communities in the city of Bangalore. The discussion will underline the positives, the difficulties, and the lessons learned on how to build sustainable and stable programs in different thrust areas, touching on efforts both in urban and rural areas. The session is moderated by the patron saint of lost causes, Honorary Irreverent Director of BIC, Ravi Chandar. The full bios of all the speakers will appear in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And through the session, if you have any questions, observations, or comments to share with our speakers, please feel free to use the Q&A box, which is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, over to Ravi.
Thanks, Lekha. You know, the back office at BIC, when they can't find somebody to moderate, I am the default option. So, I mean, sorry, at first, thanks Snigdha, Meena, and Sanjeev for being on this panel. And as I was seeing the early attendees who have joined the session, I see a lot of important names from the people who have worked in the nonprofit sector and people who are engaged in a very serious way with that sector. And suddenly I realized that there were very many more promising candidates as moderator than yours truly. Now, just to get going, you know, the session really came up because we were initially introduced to a book, and I'll just hold that up. So this is a book, A Silent Revolution. Snigdha, the author, is out here, about the Srinivasan Services Trust. And as Lekha mentioned, initiative of TVS Motors and the Sundaram Clayton Group. So there was a discussion about doing a session around the SST. And in that discussion, as is quite often when we're thinking through BIC programs, we normally prefer a thematic session where more people come onto the stage and we share cross experiences of others. And that is why we have also included, you know, Meena, who's worked with the GMR CSR arm, as well as Sanjeev, who is now continuing a tradition which was started by his great-great-great-granduncle 149 years ago. So, so welcome the three of you to this panel. So we'll get started actually with the oldest institution on the block. So Sanjeev, we will start with RBNMS because, I mean, by virtue of having started 149 years ago, and as we'll discover later, you know, both GMR as well as the SST started more in rural areas and in the hinterland. Your great-great-great-granduncle had the foresight to start and have all these institutions on Commercial Street and off Commercial Street in Bangalore. So that itself makes him hugely, I'm a person with great foresight. And coupled with that, to have a bunch of relatives who have followed, who have kept the spirit of the institution alive 150 years later, give us a sense of the genesis, what triggered this institutional charitable activity, your current range of activities, and what's the current status right now. Sanjeev?
Thanks, Ravi. Thanks for having me for this session. So I'll begin with giving you a short history of how R.K. Narayanasamy Mudaliar set up the charities. So he was basically a self-made man. He lost his father quite young. He was only 12 years old. And so he had to support his, he had two younger brothers and his mother, and he had to support the family. And so he started, his first business was when he was 12 years old. And what he did was he realized that, the vegetables, fresh vegetables grown in Bangalore, that was in demand in Chennai. And so he used to actually transport vegetables to Chennai and bring back salt to Bangalore. That was his very first business. And so, he was obviously a hardworking, enterprising young man. And he, gradually got a lot of contracts with the British, who were setting up the Bangalore cantonment around that time in the 1830s. And Bangalore was, slowly growing. And when, he actually was quite wealthy at that point of time. By the 1870s, he was quite wealthy. And then he got the subcontract to build the Atara Kacheri. And when he got that contract, he made a pledge saying that 1/3 of his wealth he will set aside for education. Since he himself, wasn't educated, he placed great emphasis on education being a social equalizer, so to speak. And what he realized was that in the British cantonment area, there was no educational institution for the local community, for the natives, as they called them back in the day. Did not have access to the English language. So that was where he decided to set up RBNMS, the first school, as a free school. It was in 1873. It started off in premises on Commercial Street while the main campus was being built, which is now on Dickinson Road. And by 1881, which is about 8 years later, it expanded to a high school. He brought down Bipin Chandra Paul from Calcutta. So he was the first principal. So even today, if you come to our campus, I can take, you'll see the sign saying Bipin Chandra Paul is the first principal of RPMS. He then, after that, he started, a few years later, he started a school for the Dalit community called the Tirukulathar School. In fact, he set up two schools, one in the Alsur area and one in the cantonment area. And post that, he set up a girls' school called the Govindammal Girls' School, named after his late wife, who passed away by then. So these were the three schools that were initially set up in the late 19th century. And after he passed away in 1911, his nephews continued to run the trust. One thing about the trust, when he set it up, he also had the foresight to ensure that it was not merely the family that ran the trust. So he had eminent people from Bangalore on the board. It had the Diwan, Sheshadri Iyer was on the board. Professor Cook, who was the first principal of Central College, was on the board, and he was also the vice president of the trust for many years. So it had, it had a provision saying that the majority of the members would be outside of the family, even though the family administers the trust. So that's why we've lasted 149 years. I think. And so in the 60s, in the 1960s, there was obviously there was an endowment set up for 1,20,000 rupees initially, and put in Mysore debenture bonds of 5% interest rate. And that money obviously lost its value by the 1960s. So the trust started taking government aid to run its schools. And by the 1970s, we had we had also started charging a nominal fee. So till the 1960s, it was free. So only in the 1970s, we started charging a nominal fee. And then the undergraduate program was set up in 1985, again, charging a very nominal fee. So we actually see, I see parents coming in who say their fathers studied there. They studied there, now their children are also, studying now at RBNS. You see 3 generations or more, students in the local community who've studied at RBNS.
Thanks, Sanjeev. In fact, it's quite amazing. An uneducated, self-made man. And, today we talk about CSR, but I would call what he did, in a sense, ISR, individual social responsibility, well ahead of its time. Today, it's fashionable to talk of the giving pledge, which Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have introduced. In his time, 150 years ago, saying that 1/3 of the wealth will go towards charity is quite amazing. And to me, the other fascinating thing about the RBNMS, the trust that you all manage even today, is that 150 years, you talk about resilience and a legacy of an institution. You see institutions frittering away, dying away, but this institution has stayed true to its purpose of education. So it's remarkable, this story, and we'll come back to some of the learnings as we go forward. Now, moving from ISR, we will go towards CSR. And, as Snigdha said, Meena is someone with over 34 years experience in the non-profit sector. So I think we will first go to the voice of experience before we come to the voice of youth. So Meena, so you, for I think roughly 17 years, you headed the GMR CSR Foundation activities. So give us a sense of the genesis of GMR. Why was it set up? And what was the main thing that they were initially interested in? Obviously, it would have grown to other things over time. So give us a sense of the GMR Foundation journey and what's the current situation out there. I know you left the foundation about a year or two ago. Meena?
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. Very inspiring listening to Sanjeev. I would say in a shortened way, most family-owned companies, which is true of most companies in India probably, the journey starts as ISR. From the heart and the passion of the founder. And in the case of the GMR Group CSR activities also, it started very much in the same mode. Much before GMR was a formal corporate entity, and CSR was a formal concept which has caught fire in the last few years. I think even about 35 years ago, when Mr. G.M. Rao was a small entrepreneur, with some jute mills and sugar mills in Raja, Srikakulam, Andhra Pradesh, really underdeveloped area. I think he was fired by this passion because he was born and he grew up in this small place. And as he went along his journey, he realized, how much he and youth like him had missed out in terms of education. Very much, the access to English education. And therefore, how much more difficult his battles were. He had seen, the lack of healthcare facilities in his area, which, resulted in so many sad, kind of incidents. He was very pained by the lack of sanitation facilities, especially for women, when he became slightly successful, whenever he was in his hometown, hordes of youth and parents would approach him and say, a job, any job, some job. He could see the helplessness And even though they may have a BA or an MA, it didn't seem good for anything at all. Or there's another example he quotes, right outside his house, there is a basket weaving community. And he says, from the day I was born to even today when I go back, or many years ago, there was no change in their standard of living or quality of life. And I think all of these things, kind of hit him very deep in his heart. He's a very, very, large-hearted, good-hearted person. And I think it pained him very much. And he said, I must do something. I must do what I can. At that time, he was small. But he did more than he could. So there were two streams of work which emanated from this desire to do something. One was the setting up of formal educational institutions. So he vowed to bring the best of English language medium education to his little town. So he set up English medium schools, then a degree college, then an engineering college, which is very well reputed today. So that was, this institution setting up was one arm of the thing. And the other arm was, how do we work with communities to really, maybe look at the skilling of youth, maybe look at the improvement of quality of education or access to health services or livelihood programs. So, there were really two strands which all started in Rajam. So, for me in the 15 years that I was there, that was like the great laboratory, where things were really rooted. And then as he grew and the corporate grew, he was formalizing. We went from, I can't have a slick one like soap to software in the case of GMR Group. So let me say jute and sugar to airports and power plants. So when we did this transition, and he's a very, person who brings in change very properly, correctly after proper study. So obviously the whole corporate entity was undergoing a lot of formalization. And then he said, my philanthropy, charity, which became a little philanthropic, it used to be reactive, as he always says. He said, I have to put this also on a professional kind of note. So somewhere in, so it was a trust formally under which all these activities used to be. So sometime in 2003-04, he said, no, this becomes a part of the GMR Group, just as, we have various companies. This is one more company. It's a Section 8 company, obviously. And, it comes under the overall governance umbrella of, the group, whatever processes, systems, everything is the same. Only these guys are not for profit and the rest of us are for profit. So that's how, and then he brought in a professional CEO, and then he brought people like us in from the nonprofit sector, education sector, and, tasked us, put together a good board and tasked us with, taking that vision forward. So that was part of the journey. So as the group grew, intuitively, we started moving to wherever the business went. So when Hyderabad airport came, we were almost the first people, and we would reach there before the business. So, the moment the idea for a business started, we'd be there. So Delhi airport or, power plants in middle India, up in the Himalayas, whatever it was. And then the law came, to which I suppose we had some kind of inputs, part of, some of those deliberations. And then what we found is with a little tweaking, we kind of fitted. So, we took it forward with the law, but the law made some things difficult and some things easier. For instance, previously there used to be a question because we were handling large companies, whether it is the Delhi airport or the Hyderabad airport, multi-stakeholder boards, should the in-house foundation be the recipient of funds to do CSR? So, that could have been a kind of this thing, whereas the law said, no, set up your own foundation. So some things became easy. Some things became streamlined. Of course, some things like reporting became more complicated. But yeah, that was the whole journey and a fantastic journey.
Thanks, Meena. When I was listening to you, the first thing that struck me, that if I was a stock analyst in Bombay, Dalal Street, I would have put a tracker on you to see where is Meena going to figure out what GMR is going to do next.
You're right.
Given that the nonprofit arm was the early bird out there. But it's again fascinating to see again that, the connection of lack of English education, feeling that education is the way out of poverty, and also this whole thing about that need that is you didn't have it and set it up for others is pretty inspiring. And I'll come back to some of the issues in terms of what drove some of the choices that you made in the foundation. Moving on to Snigdha, I mean, for those of you who came in late, Snigdha made it a point to say that while the other two have on hands execution work in the nonprofit sector, Snigdha is a storyteller. So this book, Silent Revolution, the journey of the Srinivasan Services Trust, she has traveled across their projects and she'll give us a sense of what she found. And it's quite a fascinating book because there are a lot of lessons out there and how they did mid-course correction and the like. It started about 25 years ago as a thing of the TVS Motors. And just like this had Rajam as its epicenter, there is a place called Padavedu. I don't even know where it is, but clearly Padavedu keeps coming repeatedly in this book in terms of what happened out there. And so there's always something quite fascinating about where it all began. So Snigdha is going to give us a sense that by talking to these various people, what are the main things that she discovered about the SST, what got them started and their own journey in the space. And then post that, because Snigdha's book has been helpful to me, I see lots of headings and learnings, etc., that she has put out like a quasi McKinsey consultant. So I'm going to use that framework to push questions to the rest of the group as we go forward. Over to you, Snigdha.
Yeah. Hello, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion where I don't really know if I'm the right person to be talking, sharing with people who have such interesting work and background. But anyway, thank you for having me. Like you were saying, my book is about TVS Motors CSR wing, which is called the Srinivasan Services Trust. So the trust completed 25 years last year. And I think they were at an interesting point where it felt like they had become really good at doing this thing, which was bringing about a lot of positive change in rural communities and a kind of change that was in many ways self-sustaining. And I guess Mr. Venu Srinivasan, was quite excited and really wanted to share this story with not just other companies and other people doing CSR work, but just that this is a thing that is possible in the world. I feel when I started this project, I was a little skeptical, because on paper, a lot of this sounds like all the right noises. We do intervention in education and health, etc. On paper, it doesn't really look very different than what a lot of CSR projects look like. But writing this book took about 3 years of travel and spending time with people. So when I say people, I mean people in the communities, students, women's groups, farmers, and also the staff. And so SST works on a model where the staff live in the communities that they work in. So the administrative office here in Madras has 3 people. Everybody is in the field. And so a lot of that forms the way that they work, which is absolutely grassroots, which is absolutely available to the community all the time. They live there. And the work evolves like a real sense of partnership. Partnership in the sense that the way that they've chosen to work is that they don't actually ever exit from a community that they start working in. And so 25 years ago when they started, there were these 2 places that they were interested in, which were communities around the TVS motor factories. And Mr. Srinivasan has a project that's close to his heart is the renovation of temples. So the place that you had mentioned, Padavedu, is close to Vellore, a little outside, between Chennai and Bangalore. And so that's a place where he had, in the early 90s, come in to renovate some temples, and the temple work was done, everything looked good, and it still didn't quite feel right that the people surrounding these areas were really living in abject poverty, and it didn't seem to sit right at all. And so they started in a very traditional philanthropic sense, that they set up a small office and people sat there, and when people asked for things, they distributed small amounts of money. But as time went by, they got a very clear idea of the things that they needed to do, and evolved ways that got kind of really remarkable results at the end. Yeah.
So, and Snigdha, if you can just give a sense today, I think you're now in some 5,000 villages, and
Yeah,
it's holistic village development. So if you could just briefly talk to the whole model in terms of embracing all aspects of literally rural life and impacting them, and the scale of what it is today.
Okay, so at present, SST actively works in about 2,500 villages, and these are spread across 5 Indian states, mostly southern India, closer to the factories and closer to the temples that have been renovated. And there's a staff about 400 on the ground that is full-time employees who live in villages. They are on 3 different tiers. I guess the numbers we talk about is like up to date, about 3 million people they've worked with to date. And when we say model of work, so this, like, it's hard to find a point to pull out and say it's the starting point, but in general, what they do is improve infrastructure of government. So they're not a kind of NGO that goes in and makes a new hospital or a new school. They tap funds and renovate PHCs, Anganwadis, health camps, education for women about health. But if you were to say what's the first point for them in many places is economic development. So what Mr. Srinivasan says is, like, don't talk to people about health and education when they're hungry. So start looking at ways to get people to earn money right away. So that could be through self-help groups where women start making things and selling things, tapping into loans for livestock, getting farmers to increase their agricultural output right away. And so that would be like the first step that they work with. And as they've been doing these kind of work, one of the interesting or the kind of hard to believe things that they do is that they insist on the partnership with communities that they work with. So for example, if SST is going to come into your community and renovate a school and they're going to put in X amount of money, the community has to put in a percentage as well. And in some places where this has been going on for a long time, there are projects where the community, collects money from everybody or 1 or 2 people who are comfortable. They contribute completely for those projects. Yeah.
So actually, the last point that you made is really what I'd like to first take up, because for people in the nonprofit sector, especially when they're looking at who will give the next grant, the CSR, of course, a bit fortunate that there is the parent company. But for example, as Sanjeev was mentioning, once the money ran out, there was need to go for. So let's just at first look at this whole aspect of sustainability.
Right.
In your book, you talk about it all started. I mean, just proof that I did read your book, Snigdha.
I believe you.
Lekha, who's watching us, cannot believe that Ravi actually does read a book. So, it started with this leaky tap story, which I found quite fascinating. And for those on the call, I would recommend reading the book. But the point that is being made, that in the first 10 years of the existence of the SST, it was more giving and grant giving and the like. And it was, people felt that it was an unending kind of tap that would just keep giving. But when they realized that it's not just the capital assets, you have a leaky tap that needs to be fixed, you expect somebody from SST to come and fix it. And the community did not take any ownership. And consequently, it was felt that unless the community also takes ownership by contributing to a particular project, financially or through time or through effort, that project will not happen. So it was a pretty radical decision. So the question I'd like to ask Meena and Sanjeev, Meena, in your case also, in your case, the question really would be, was it always GMR providing that funds so that you didn't have to look elsewhere? And for Sanjeev, to be sustainable, you had to look at other options and reimagine how this is going to be happening, including from free education to partially paid education by the people. So if both of you can share your respective models of how the foundation's activity or the trust's activity is inherently sustainable. So Sanjeev, if you could go first with this.
Thanks, Ravi. Yeah, so when in the 1960s, basically the trust realized, the capital endowment is not going to support the activities of the trust as it used to. So the first thing they did, of course, was approach the government to fund, the salaries of the teachers. So which was a big chunk of the costs of the trust. So that happened. And secondly, then the trust decided that they'll charge a nominal amount as well to the students. And so both those changes occurred around.
This nominal amount would be what you mentioned, I think about a fourth of the normal fees that people elsewhere would pay.
Yes. So today we charge, for example, we charge about, I'd say around 10,000 rupees a year for a school student. But also we have a policy. Our policy is quite clear that no student will be turned away because they can't afford to pay. So we have scholarships. So one of the other things that we've done focused on is bringing in endowments to support students. In fact, Mr. Srinivasan himself has raised a scholarship fund. One of his dear friends, Mr. Lakshmanan, who is the Vice President of Cognizant, was an alumni of RBNMS. So for his 60th birthday, Mr. Srinivasan and his friends raised a sum of money, and they endowed a scholarship fund for us a few years ago. And so what we have done now, what we have looked at is a model where there is a fee component, but also there are scholarships that we back when we tell our students right at the very beginning, when if you are in financial need, we will support you with scholarships. And also because we have a large asset bank, so to speak, in the heart of Bangalore, we've leveraged that as well in terms of renting out some of our properties. So we get income coming in from rental income as well. But just the cost of 148-year-old institution, we have buildings that are 125, 130 years old. Just to maintain buildings is expensive, and as well as then putting in new infrastructure costs a lot of money. So yes, so we have an approach now where we look at donors, we look at fees, and also we look at our internal accruals to fund us.
Thanks, Sanjeev. There are a lot of nonprofits which tend to be asset rich but cash poor, and sustainability inherently, you got to figure out how to keep the lights burning month after month. Meena, coming to you, I think you were in an unenviable position in this group. That tap of inflow was not an issue for you. Correct me if I'm wrong, Meena.
Taps always give less water than you would like, right? Especially when you are in a sector like this, you really dream of doing so much. But resources, though really not seriously a constraint, are never as much as you'd like. But I think talking to the point of what Snigdha was saying, it's also about bringing in involvement through charging. So again, also like Sanjeev said, for our education institutions or hospitals, we have many kinds of scholarship schemes. In the hospital, we have a very good hospital in Rajam, where, a person walking in, if they said they couldn't afford the treatment, a social worker would immediately go fill out a form and then say, this person should be given 30% off, 50% off, whatever. Similarly, in educational institutions, from zero fees to, a large, significant scholarship. We run 15 skill training centers, and they are really excellent ones. So there, we don't charge fees, but we do take a commitment fee from the student, because it's very, very common for students to kind of walk in, just sign up, and 3 days later just, disappear. So we said, put down 1,000 rupees. That means he asks his father or his mother for the money. Then they will ask him, why are you hanging around at home when you should be there? So, commitment comes in. Or we run community toilets. And we would insist that a family take a card, a monthly card of 30 rupees or 50 rupees to use that toilet, 4 members or 6 members or whatever, or RO drinking water. So sometimes the money is a kind of commitment that you, or a buy-in that you get for that activity. And also, even if it's a livelihood program, and suppose it's about somebody buying a cow. So there is a certain amount that you put in, a certain amount that they put in, or they commit to get the cow insured, or something like that. So there's always this kind of pushing the community to participate, also monetarily. And the other thing, as a part of a large corporate, we found a lot of our colleagues wanting to contribute. So we also facilitated employee, at one level, employee time, skills, going out volunteering, but also if they wished to contribute financially. So some of them would sponsor children, for instance, for their education over the years. So it wasn't a revenue stream, if you call it that, but it's definitely a kind of buying from another very important stakeholder in terms of putting money.
Right. Before there's another aspect. I'm sorry, the current has gone in my place. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. I will come back as soon as the generator kicks in. It's been coming and going the whole day. The point is, you mentioned about the cow, and Snigdha has some interesting stories about how cows have changed the life of people in the village, and how yields got improved, etc. So Snigdha, would you like to give us a sense at this stage? Because
specifically about the livestock,
and that particular element of how a village can improve around a livelihood, around milk production, etc.
Right.
Just to give a sense of
I think from SST's experience, getting a poor household an asset in the form of a dairy cow can change fortunes overnight. And so these are usually, you connect a woman through a self-help group, with bank loans. And I've met some of these women, and it really is life-changing, right? Because for these women, this is the first time that they own something. And it's also the first time that they're able to, create money for themselves and manage it. So it's not just that you hook up people with a loan. Once that happens, they make sure there's interventions with the local veterinary hospitals so that people know how to take care of a dairy animal, keep it indoors. They have these special mats that the cows stand on, and special food and whatever, to make sure that a person is able to get something like 30 liters of milk a day. And within a few years, that is life-changing. I met so many women who were able to, build a roof, get their children married, based on the asset of one cow. And I think, I know when I started this project, I really had this, kind of organic, Jersey cows are bad, whatever. I had these ideas but the difference between 10 liters of milk and 30 liters of milk is life-changing in parts of rural India. And the ability to have an asset like that in their own name, and it is an incredible thing. And then to have those small connections of how to keep your animal healthy, how to increase milk output, it creates something which is incredible, right? And I think I'd mentioned in Maharashtra also, there's an artificial insemination program where it's something like 30 rupees people have to pay. And yeah, you can just increase your assets within 3 to 6 months. And for many of the self-help groups, that's the first step. You get people to have an animal at home, and immediately you're able to increase incomes. And then so many things can fall in place thereafter. You know, once people aren't worried about the next meal, a lot of things can fall in place very easily after that.
That's true. The importance of livelihood. Moving on, Snigdha's book documents actually at the early stages of the SST. TVS Motor was known, and I think Mr. Venu Srinivasan's emphasis on Japanese model of total quality management and Kaizen and the like. And I found it quite fascinating that in the early days of SST, it was some of the Japanese who were advising in terms of how to structure and do what needs to be done in SST.
Yeah.
And they make the point that just keep stripping away all the wastage that is happening, and that itself will give you a better product.
Yes.
So the question that I have, which is really, I'm bringing in elements that, the book talks about using professionalism and things. And Meena, you mentioned this, that just like you have the for-profit sector within the GMR Group, the foundation is another non-profit. So my question to Meena and Sanjeev, taking off from what Snigdha has documented in the book about the SST experience, this whole thing of bringing professional inputs into the non-profit foundation sector. In your case, Meena, you had access to the corporate. I'd be interested in listening to Sanjeev. How did he bring other professional inputs in running these schools? Because he really doesn't have the corporate kind of backing for what RBNMS does. So just walk us through, Meena, you could go first, in terms of what were the kind of professional inputs that you were able to bring to the nonprofit foundation as some kind of cross-pollination?
Yeah. I would say the professionalization of the foundation came from two kind of threads. One is, of course, the GMR Group corporate processes. But the second is also that, the senior leadership team came from very professional, nonprofit, academic, and NGO organizations. So we also came with that kind of understanding. But in terms of the corporate contribution, I would say, every process, including how you run a board meeting, we were given that framework. Or I would say, how do you kind of train your staff? We would often be part of the larger corporate training programs. How do you kind of do your reviews? So understanding that metrics are different for the profit and the non-profit, but yet how do you bring in the rigor of reviews? So I would say that a lot of these things kind of mattered and helped to very quickly kind of set things in line. And the interesting thing is that we move with the business. So in a way, you're part of already that kind of larger, HR system or admin system. So all those, processes with modifications. And we were very careful and clear that modifications were needed. That you do not take on corporate things without a kind of churning to adapt it to your requirement. So I think that was the important thing. And then for instance, my own nonprofit, I worked at CE for 20 years. I did bring in things like a very deep respect for SOPs, which, not very normal in the nonprofit sector 15 years ago. But every little activity of ours was SOP. And that was important because we were spread across about 25 locations. So how does the guy who joins new in a remote, area in Uttarakhand, how does he know how we do a certain thing? And we've already made those mistakes and learned. So very elaborate kind of documentation of SOPs, orientation on those SOPs, and kind of we have a very interesting thing called a summit every year where people from 25 locations come in and kind of learn from each other. And the business also comes in, the host business also comes in to see what are these guys talking about, and we get an understanding of business. So I think a lot of cross-learning and pollination, as you say, extremely useful and valuable.
Right. Thanks. So, Meena, the SOP and documentation is fine, but one often, and I'm not talking in the context of foundations only, even I'm talking about NGOs who get donor money. Sometimes a lot of their time goes in complying with donor reporting requirements instead of going and, for example, you have Mackenzie Bezos, the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, who has a very interesting philanthropic policy. She just identifies people who are credible and have done good work. And she says, I trust you, you know what you're doing. Take this money and go ahead and do good. And don't worry about telling me about impact and fill 10 forms every night, etc. Is there this whole thing about, in a sense, death by paperwork that many NGOs are, in a sense, subjected to as part of reporting requirement? Is that something which is a bit problematic?
It is. And I would say a lot of NGOs are today dependent on CSR funding. The CSR funding requirements are frightening in their reporting requirements. I mean, foundations like me at one level, because we had the backing and we had a kind of infrastructure, we could still comply. But my sympathy is with, the smaller NGOs who are onboarded as implementing partners, the kind of, requirements. And I don't blame the corporate either, because the NCA regulations are now so scary. They need to report and they are paranoid about it, because if I underspend by 1 rupee, I have to explain, I have to open an account, I have to transfer it within such a date. If I don't, the company will pay a fine and I will pay a fine personally. Yeah? So it's kind of very frightening, and I think it is death by paperwork for sure. I hope the regimen kind of becomes a little more kind, and even this so-called evaluation and impact assessment. I'm not sure. First, my CSR proposal or projects have to be on the side. I have to say which villages, how many people. I mean, how can I say all this, before I begin? And post facto, how is that evaluation going to be, probably examined by AI or something like that, because you're uploading something called a Form 2 now, CSR Form 2, which they say will be looked at by artificial intelligence. God knows what they will do with it. It's quite scary. And not necessary to the extent that it is being made out to be.
Yeah.
At all.
That's what I felt. Sanjeev, you don't have, to some extent, this level of problem which CSR reporting has got. But in terms of professionalizing the education sector in which you are in, how do you cross-pollinate and get expertise from others to flow into the institution?
I think for us, Ravi, what we did was a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, is that we said that we've got to start from the board level, right? So it was, for us, what we did was we said we will bring in people at the board level who are committed to education and who are, people who are right at the very top of their profession, to build, credibility in terms of inputs from them, and in terms of us changing our approach into becoming a more professionally run organization. So, now we have, people who are child psychiatrists, people who are committed to child rights on our board. And that makes a huge difference, I think, when you have that sort of direction given to you at the board level. That's first. Secondly, what we also said was that, education, what we realized very quickly is not just books and the blackboard or your white screen, but has to be holistic. So we said that we will look at women and girls and look at the issues that they have and support them in terms of whether it's menstrual health, whether it's nutrition, So we bring in professionals in all those aspects to work with our girls. And we've seen some fantastic, transformations happen with the girls. Even artists. We have artists coming in and working with the girls. And you see what your normal school curriculum, would not be able to achieve. We've seen that sort of transformation. And of course, on the administrative side, we've brought in full-time professionals as well to administer the trust as well, so that on the administrative side, we're not focusing our efforts and energies on that side.
Right. So Sanjeev, taking on to another theme that comes through in Snigdha's book about SST is what I would call as patience, and loads of patience as you work with communities and bring about change. I mean, your institution being out there for 150 years itself is a standing testimony to patience. The question, in your experience, how important have you seen the necessity to stick the course on the things that you want to do? And even though in the short run, you might have some setbacks or it didn't go the way you wanted to go in the school or some changes, you stay the course, and patience as a virtue to bring change and transformation over a period of time. Have you had any experience on this particular aspect of working in this sector?
I think, when you're working in education, I mean, the first thing you realize is that teachers don't like to be told what to do. So very quickly we realized, if he's going to say, "Oh, we're bringing in teacher training, monitoring, evaluation," all of that is going to meet with resistance. So we learned that very quickly. So now it's a partnership. It's a partnership where the teachers are bought in. They own the processes that we try to bring in, and so that has been for us quite an important learning that we've had. Unless you involve the teachers in anything you want to do and get them to buy in, it's not going to happen.
Got it. Snigdha, you talk a lot about in the book. So give us a sense of this whole, the patience angle, because if it doesn't work the first time, you try a second time or you try an alternate route, but you don't give up, is one of the recurring themes in your book.
Yeah.
So can you, with an example or two, give a sense of what it means to be patient in this space?
Yeah.
Because some of these things have taken years and years for that. I mean, it may look rosy today, but it was not so easy to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that is one of the wonderful things of having a company, not having to worry about money. And so these projects don't have a fixed timeline. So immediately I'm reminded of the afforestation project, which SST took up around Padevidu. So around Bangalore, you have these kind of outcrop of the Western Ghats. And particularly around this place, there was absolutely no vegetation on these hills. And one was because people grazed animals. And second was like, I don't know how to describe it, but these young boys used to set fire to the hills when they were bored. This seems to be like nothing else to do late at night, take your bike up, go up to the hills and set a fire. And so the effect of these two things meant that there was absolutely no vegetation on these hills, just bare rock. And so when SST started this afforestation project, it wasn't just get saplings, put them in the ground. It was like almost 4 years of working with the goat herders in that community to convince them to take up another occupation that would keep them in one place. And so some of these women who used to graze animals usually they were goats, they got them to slowly take up other things like mushroom cultivation. But this did not happen overnight. It took a long time. Secondly, there were people who were cutting down the brush for firewood. And so then a project arose to get people comfortable using gas stoves. That took a long time. People were really scared they're going to explode, this fear. That took a long time again. And the third element of getting these boys to stop setting things on fire was to unofficially make them the fire patrol of the area. And they were the guys, they gave them some whistles. If anything started, they would alert and put out the fires. So it was these three things which have nothing to do with planting trees, nothing to do with vegetation, which were very important parts, which took about 5 years before anything went in the ground. And when they did start the planting, which was eventually some like 250,000 trees, it flourished because everybody was invested, everyone was involved, and it didn't feel like, don't come into the forest, don't cut down trees. There was no element of that. There is no fence around this. Everyone takes care of it. It has thrived. It is full of animals. And that's like a good example of the patience in which I can think of. I've gone to some of these meetings where you're just trying to talk to people about one thing. It is not easy, especially when you do these sit down on the ground. Everyone has a stake. Everyone financially contributes. It is not easy. I can't imagine the patients involved to like, forget this, let's just go plant something somewhere else. And so I've seen that radical patience, you know, and the staff work with that. There's no question of not doing it. There's no question of leaving. Everyone should feel the same way about it. And I think that's why it works. Yeah.
So Meena, more than patience, actually, I want to ask you a modified question based on what Sanjeev said to get the teachers buy-in and make them partners, collaborators. So in a similar way, when you come to somebody like GMR, which does these large infrastructure projects, and invariably it has a lot of land acquisition issues, civil society is up in arms. I mean, it may not be as bad as the kind of pressures that the mining companies face, but it's similar. So, one of the reasons for the foundation, or one of the things that the foundation will have to deliver on, is to gain the trust of the local community, the people who are, in a sense, impacted in the short run by the land acquisition, but likely to gain in the long run with what development brings to that particular area. So your own experience on what worked in terms of getting the people to come on board, and if I can say, break trust deficits that normally exist in these kind of infrastructure projects.
Yeah, that for us is obviously the very, very big challenge. And I think the first few times we were a little surprised by that. We were innocent 15, 17 years ago. But then we quickly realized that, you know, we need to kind of win the trust. And as I think Snigdha pointed out, livelihoods is what it all boils down. Can you, because knowingly or unknowingly, somehow the signaling is that a big industrial activity, corporate activity is going to start over here, and therefore all of us will get jobs. I mean, this could be a kind of unsaid understanding in the community, or somebody may have even said, "Arey, sabko naukri milega, hum plant lagayenge," you know, or anybody might have said. But that is the very, very first real demand, and we face this very interestingly in Hyderabad airport. About a year before the airport was to be commissioned, we were in the villages working in the communities. We saw, you know, several of these shops popping up, which said, jobs in the airport, contact here. So obviously these were some kind of broker guys who were going to take money, you know, how they were going to kind of, you know, mess up the youth over there. We have no idea who they were, but we noticed this and we said, there is something going on here which is not going to be good either for the community or for the thing. So what we did is we were anyway into a lot of skilling activities. So on the one hand, we'd already done surveys of all the youth in the affected villages, which had given land to the airport. We had their age, their skills, their education, interests, whatever. So what we did is we requested the CEO of the airport to call a meeting of all the vendors, contractors, subcontractors, who are going to take over the airport operations. A large parts of these are always contracted out. So we sat with them and we said, now you tell us your requirements. If you are the electrical maintenance guy, how many electricians? What skill level do you need? If you are the plumbing guy, tell us. If you are running shops, tell us what are the retail sales people, food and beverages, parking. So we generated this whole set. And then we tried to match these two and bridge the gap through skilling programs. So almost 9 months before the airport was to open, we had started these skilling programs saying, okay, the skilling program is 3 months. We'll help you find a temporary job. But we must also understand the contractors and everybody was very nervous. They said, we are not going to take 100% of the people that you put in front of us. No. Suppose they all go on strike. Suppose they do this. And those are very legitimate concerns. We said, nothing doing. We will skill them. We will bring them to you. You interview. You find them competent. You employ them on your terms and conditions. And there was therefore an uneasy kind of peace. I would say everybody was a little concerned, but also thinking that there may be a solution. And it worked beautifully because, when airports start there at the other end of the world, who for a 12,000 rupee job is going to travel from Jayanagar to, Devanahalli? It is the guys around Devanahalli who will stick in those jobs. So it worked beautifully because these people were skilled, ready, and the contractors found, this makes sense. We don't have to pay for transport, this, that. Here are these boys and girls ready. And I think that did a lot in terms of, one, the airport got good skilled manpower because we'd done a good quality job of training. So airport services were good. Local community was happy. Contractors, everybody was kind of happy. So this was one of the win-win things that, for instance, we also did a similar thing in an SEZ that was coming up. You have to be a little strategic.
Yes, and I presume this is not overnight. You have to work with the community over a period of time.
Absolutely.
Right. So this really brings us, almost 1 hour into the conversation and time to take some questions. So Lekha, I see about a few questions already posted. So Lekha, starting with Indira, you could ask people to actually voice the question and the panelists could respond. So could we go with Indira first, Lekha?
Thank you. I hope that I'm not visible because I haven't brushed my hair. Yes, well, first of all, may I say thank you to all three panelists and to Ravi for this really, really interesting, strong session. I think you've made it very accessible, and yet the complexity and the positivity of of all the three efforts has come through. So that's really very interesting. I was just really my question was around this engagement with the government. All three organizations, all three of you have mentioned engaging with the government, and obviously this is very much a part of what institutions such as yourself do on such as the mother institutions or the host institutions do for other kinds of work on a daily basis. But in terms of the actual social wings or social arms of the organizations, do you need to maintain this as a sustaining effort, or is it something that is just ad hoc and responsive, to a situation? Is it a reactive engagement with the government, or is it something that you work on, the social arm works on constantly?
I think, Sanjeev, you can talk about your experience of being a government-aided school, and then we'll go to the other two on that issue.
Okay, thank you, Ravi.
So since we take money from the government, obviously we have to deal with them.
I'm sure you like your block education officer. Let's do a show.
Well, which is one of the reasons now we decided that we will try to disengage from the government is one of our policy decisions that we've taken. So and obviously that comes with challenges. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, in Karnataka especially, education is seen as a commodity, plain and simple. And so we have seen that upfront, and we have actually decided that we will try to minimize interface with the government as much as possible. Obviously, you can't in certain regulatory areas, but otherwise, we've said that we will try to be as far away as we can, if possible.
Meena, your interface with the government?
Whenever we work in a government school or an Anganwadi, it is with the blessings and the permission of the government, obviously, the DO, the BEO, the women and child, whoever it is. We have found reactions ranging between indifferent to supportive. In the sense, indifferent means, okay, they'll just sign the letter and then you go and do it. There are some who will actually take a large interest and support. It's a mutually supportive thing. In a very few cases, have they been negative? Maybe because we were coming in to do what they, to help them in their task.
Mm-hmm.
In the area of skilling, there is a lot of because there's a lot of government skill programs.
Mm-hmm.
So there also we have to interface with the government, but mainly now it has gone to the central level. So, the NSDC, the National Skill Development Corporation, and it's all very kind of computerized. You feed in data and, something happens. So that's not been too difficult. So I would say that on the whole, not very difficult, but not all, it is often indifferent. It is in some cases supportive.
Right.
And we are happy with that. As long as it's not negative, we're okay.
Sorry. Thanks, Meena. Snigdha, before you answer, what I noticed in SST, you have a lot of former bureaucrats in the SST system. The chairmen are normally former IAS officers.
Yes.
So clearly there is some strategic thinking there that embracing them as part of SST is an important part of achieving things on the ground because they know how the process works and the like.
Yeah.
So can you talk to that, Snigdha?
Yeah. So SST, one of those things which again feels counterintuitive is they work very closely with the government. Mm-hmm. And that's a conscious choice saying that we have, these are public funds. They belong to the people. Just because it's difficult, we're not going to walk away from accessing it. That's SST's approach with that. And to help them navigate that, their staff is, like you said, retired IAS officers. The field officers are, again, retired bureaucrats who've worked in those specific districts to help navigate those channels. But yeah, I mean, frankly, it's not easy, but it's one of those kind of intentionally difficult things they've done just because I think it's a matter of principle. Part of SST kind of has like a frugal core to it. And also, I think it's close to Mr. Srinivasan's heart that these are public funds. Thousands of crores lie unutilized, and we're not going to walk away from it. These funds should reach people, and that's a huge part of the philosophy. And it is hard. It is a lot of paperwork, but I've had that. I've met some of these public officials at the block level who it's been a really kind of beautiful partnership. I met one gentleman who had been transferred 21 times in 23 years, and working with SST, he was able to actually get stuff done. And it's not easy. He might be transferred, perhaps he's already been transferred, but it is rewarding for both sides. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Snigdha. Next, we have a question from Mubarak Ali. So, Mr. Ali, if you could go with your question.
From Kerala, I'm audible to all?
Yes, you're audible. Please go ahead.
Respected panelists, thanks for your invaluable insight and extending my sincere thanks to organizer for this opportunity. I proceed to Snigdha Madam. What most important takeaway you want to remember read this book, A Silent Revolution? My question to you, ma'am, please.
I will actually, Snigdha, I don't know whether you heard him clearly.
I'm sorry, that wasn't.
Yeah, I will just repeat his question because it's also posted here. What is the most important takeaway you want people to remember after, your work and in documenting SST? What's been the most important takeaway?
Well, thank you for your question. for me, the most important takeaway was hope. There was so much hope in the stories and meeting people. And 4 years ago when I started this project, I was very cynical. I was very skeptical about what can a bike company do. And I'm very happy that I stand corrected. And it's been very hopeful. There's been so many, I don't know, I think we need some feel-good stories. And for me, the experience of meeting people and getting to document this has been life-changing for me. And yeah, that is my takeaway from the.
And there are two other follow-up questions from Mr. Mubarak Ali. One is it's to all the panelists. That is it very necessary that NGOs be sustainable? I can answer that. It's a no-brainer. If you're not sustainable, the game's over. But if any panelist has a different view on sustainability, happy to hear that.
Ravi, I never know what sustainability means in this context. It's really, it seems to me like passing the buck. In the sense, if I put my program into a government scheme, then it's sustainable. So, I mean, what? Or you say you charge users for services. So I'm very confused about this concept of sustainability as far as the delivery of essential services is concerned. Are consumers to pay for it? Okay, sharing is one thing, but can we ever fully pay for it? Because ultimately, a lot of people understand sustainability as that. The user pays.
Yeah.
But I mean, then what's the point?
Yeah. So in fact, Meena, just to add to that, so there's one sustainability, obviously, that you need to match your income and expenditure. This is one aspect. But there's another one which is there in the SST story. One of the things that they do to get also the confidence of the villagers and the communities they work with is just let them know all the government schemes they are entitled to and ensure that the government benefits that are meant for them reach them just through that one activity. So it's nothing, I mean, it's another, what the definition that you asked. So you could do that activity saying access to government schemes you're entitled to itself makes the community more resilient.
Absolutely. Yeah, we would do that in all the communities. For instance, if disability pensions are not coming, how do you make sure that they do? If widow pensions are not coming, or if there is a scheme for cows. So yes, informing and leveraging government funds is absolutely critical. But sustainability itself is, to me, a very confused and confusing term.
Got it. He has one last question, which was quite interesting. And, so it says, what would you tell your 25-year-old self, Meena, Sanjeev, Snigdha, and of course, it's all, I guess, also to me. I would tell my 25-year-old self that on the way to the pub, make sure you do some volunteering with the non-profits before you head to the pub. Anybody wants to play their 25-year-old self?
I wish it were that easy to go back.
Basically, what would you tell youngsters of today? Because non-profit is not, as we were talking earlier, is not something that gets people out of bed and is excited that this is what I want to do. I might admire people who are working with non-profits and for causes. I admire them, but I don't want to be one of them. I admire school teachers, but school teaching is not for me. So that is, I think, what the question is really about. How do you get youngsters more interested in larger societal causes?
I think exposure is the first key. I mean, we have always found that, I mean, of course, some people come tuned with a little bug which says, profits, I'm not so turned on by, and I'm turned on by seeing results in people's lives. But I think everybody has a vein of goodness and decency. They don't have opportunities probably to engage, and increasing those opportunities, whether through schools, colleges, or whether through employee volunteering, it makes a huge difference, because it is, this good feeling rush is a bit addictive, in fact.
Right.
Doing good and seeing good.
Yeah. Snigdha, any learnings from your whole, all your interviews in terms of how to get youngsters more engaged?
I don't know the answer to this question, but it has been on my mind, especially when I think of like the genesis of this project and Mr. Srinivasan's father, T.S. Srinivasan, I know a lot of the work, the community work came out of going to a place like Hosur in the 50s and 60s and seeing the poverty, seeing people firsthand. Same with Mr. Srinivasan, going to Padevidu, seeing how people lived and being moved at that moment to do something. And I don't know what that looks like today when young people are so much more isolated and disconnected from people around them. I don't envy it. I know that impulse must be, it is there in everyone. I don't know how it manifests when a lot of the systems and technology that we use keep us away, and they're designed to keep us away from people who aren't like us. Yeah, I don't know the answer to this question, but yeah, needs to be asked.
Don't know often is a good answer, because at least it's curious and thinking. There is one other question I see from Rajeshwari. Rajeshwari, if you could unmute and ask your question.
Hello, Ravi. Thanks. And thanks to the panelists. Very interesting session. My question is on, professionalizing nonprofits. What do the panelists think about, governance, nonprofit governance policies that are required, considering that, we're talking about, transparency, professionalism, accountability, also that, most of these are funded by individuals or initiated by individuals. They pump in their money. So there is always a risk of conflict of interest situation. When this is a possibility in the sector, how important is it to have, non-profit governance policies so that, you don't always think that you're doing the best, but actually meet up to the standards that this sector has to set for itself, at least in a country like India.
Anyone?
Ravi, I'll take that.
Yeah.
So I think the key, of course, is the board. I mean, you have to have a board that is independent, that is committed, and is not just your chamchas and your friends. I think if you put in a professional board, people with values as well as skills, that's the key. Because if the board is ultimately the governance system that all institutions have. So if you have a good board, I think that's most of your governance systems will come into place.
So basically keeping the institution honest with the strong independent board. Anything to add, Meena? Yeah.
I would say, there are a lot of these accreditations these days, which really go into governance aspects. So I think any good NGO should get itself accredited with some of these, Guide Star or whatever these. They will ask you those questions and they will, go into the governance and give you the guidance. And once you have that star or accreditation, people can trust you. And trust is so very critical because I've seen it on both sides. NGOs think all corporates are cutthroat profiteers. Corporates think all NGOs are shady operations with no systems and processes, and this trust has to be built. It's really critical. So I would say yes, like Sanjeev said, a board, a credible board, a questioning board, a critical board, and then these external accreditations.
Right. Snigdha, any last word on this?
I think they covered it. I think trust is very important, and that people in the community are watching you and judging you and remembering what you did and what you said. And so, yeah, that's all very important part of it.
Cool. So that brings us to the end of this session. I just find that somebody has just posted a question. Oh, that was just Indira thanking us for this session. So thank you very much. Now, this is a stage where we call on Lekha, who throws us into the deep end. So she needs to take an exam at the end where she has to summarize what we said. And so over to you, Lekha.
It's just getting better and better. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you, Meena. Thank you, Snigdha, for all the work that you do and for bringing in such a focused insight into the work that you've been doing and that the others have been doing. I cannot actually summarize it better than what our three audience questioners have already done so. And thank you, Ravi, for being always the one holding it all together, and so lovelily done. Thanks for your time, and hope to see you all at BIC in person, and a few more conversations like these and a few more community building activities like these would be welcome, I'm sure. That's all from us. Thank you, audiences, and good night from us, and see you next time.
Thanks, Lekha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Snigdha.
Privilege to be part of
Thank you,
it.
Ravi. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.